Hello, friends. I am starting a new series, Heroes in Real Life. I model this on a series run by Reader's Digest in the earlier days, Heroes in Real Life. They brought to life those people about whom we do not hear or see them in press because they are not that visible. They're ordinary people, came up from ranks. They defied odds and they came up in life. So, that kind of people I wish to bring to life and present them to you in this series. I am fortunate to have in my acquaintances and friends some people who have come up the hard way by sheer hard work, integrity, honesty, sincerity. And these people will not be found to you. You see many heroes in press every day. The presidents, the actors, the rich people, the powerful people. They are all put there by their parents, by their forefathers, and by some vested interests. Or some people have natural talents, a good singer. One cannot be a good singer until you have a nice voice. That is God given. That is given to you at the birth. If you don't have it at the birth, you can never be a singer. Whatever practice you may do, you can never be a singer. Some natural talents. Those natural talents everybody doesn't have. And the heroes I am presenting do not have any such natural talents. They worked hard and they studied hard, they learned, they experimented, and they came up. So friends, in this series I am presenting you heroes in real life. Hello friends, welcome. In this series on heroes in real life, I bring to you my friend Robert Charles Anderson Jr. He was born not with a golden spoon, not with a silver spoon, perhaps a wooden spoon or no spoon. He was brought up by his single mother without any support from his father, working as a waitress 3 shifts per day to provide for him and his sister. And he joined Marines when he was 17. And when he came back, he did not become negative. He did not hate the world for the war. He fought Vietnam War. He studied himself. He went back to school, studied hard. And he joined as a programmer to begin with. And he ended up as a chief technical officer and a de facto CEO of a technology company where he worked for 26 years. Not only that, on his personal front, he was married to the same woman for 46 years, and the couple exuded the same kind of love that they had at the beginning of the marriage. They have 2 lovely children who are married and leading excellent lives. Bob worked till he was 70 and retired, and he is living in peace. In this series, I bring his life to you. Enjoy. Bob, you are not born into an affluent home. How did you cope with it in your younger days?
Well, when I was young, and this is at the age of 5 years old, we lived in Chicago. That's where I was born. My mother and father got a divorce when I was only 5, and my sister was 2 years older. We moved to Florida with my aunt into Delray Beach, Florida. My mother did not have a college degree. She had a basic high school education, but was a very hard worker. And she would hold down 3 jobs as a waitress, working as a car hop or catering or something of this nature, to support my sister and I, put clothes on our back and food on the table. she scraped up enough money to send my sister and I both to a Catholic school in our local community. I don't know, maybe back then it wasn't so costly. But though we didn't have a lot of money or things or fancy clothes, we were very wealthy in other ways. We were wealthy in love for each other, and we had a clean home. It was simple, not fancy, but we all pitched in and worked together. My mother worked very hard outside the home. My sister and I would keep the house, and we didn't know how to cook really well, but we would do laundry, we would iron our own clothing. And we had neighbors that we played with who were of the same economic strata that we were. So I had no idea that we didn't have much money, because I had everything else that was really important in life, which is love, food on the table, simple, roof over my head, clothes on my back, good school, and we were happy. So in that regard, though we weren't, quote unquote, from an affluent background at all, we were from a very loving background. So on my mother's side of the equation, there was great love, hard work, good work ethic, good family love ethics, which formed the foundation for the rest of my life. We'll get into other questions dealing with the intellectual side or job side later. But this side of my life was the foundation for everything that happened later on in life, dealing with kindness, compassion, good disposition, never complaining, never a harsh word for anyone. This was my mother. And I tried through my life to emulate her as much as I could, because she was my role model for being a good human being and having a strong work ethic, never giving up, never complaining. So in that regard, I was very fortunate more than most, I would gather. So I guess that's about the best answer I could give you to that question.
Bob, can you please tell me about your school days?
All right. Let's start when my family moved from Chicago to Florida when I was 5 years old, since I don't remember a great deal about my kindergarten days in Chicago, other than it was very cold. So my sister and I went to a Catholic school in Delray Beach, Florida called St. Vincent Farrell. It was a new school. It was just constructed, and it was populated by Irish nuns directly off the boat from Ireland. Now, I don't know if any of the people who will ever watch this video were familiar with Irish nuns in a Catholic school. Well, we're talking some major strict disciplinarians. They did not believe in sparing the rod and spoiling the child. There were times when, if we messed up in class or we did something wrong, we had to walk up to the front of the class and we would have to hold out our hand. And the nun would take a pointer, it's like a long wooden dowel that you could use to point to a blackboard, and she would come down, whack, right on the palm of the hand. And it wasn't a love tap. I mean, they were pretty serious. So in those days, corporal punishment was meted out accordingly, and nobody complained, because if I would have gone home and told my mother that I was punished by the nun, then I would have gotten a good whooping from my mother in addition to that for causing trouble in school. So it's a shame that in today's society there is so much liberalness that discipline in school is very lacking. And if you don't learn discipline at home and you don't learn it in school, how to conduct yourself in a group of people, particularly in a learning environment, your life eventually becomes totally chaotic, because that lack of discipline carries over into everything in your future life. Well, with me, that kind of discipline served me well, since later on when I went to the Marine Corps, I had drill instructors that were just a bit tougher than my Irish nuns, but I had a good grounding in it. Anyway, at the age of about 7, I decided I want to become an altar boy, which means you would serve Mass and do the things back in the day when the Catholic Mass was in Latin. So I learned, and there's quite a bit to learn Latin in the server's side of the Mass, the kids who would help the priest during the service. And over time, I actually learned most of the priests' Latin in the Catholic Mass. It was really remarkable. I didn't so much enjoy the Catholic Church after everything turned into English and they started playing guitars and whatnot. It didn't seem like a church service. It seemed more like a musical gathering. Whereas when it was in Latin, to me there was this sense of history. There was this sense of binding back to the original Church of Rome. Maybe I'm sort of old-fashioned, but that's kind of the way I think. I really enjoyed it. So I served Mass actually for 11 years. And also during that time when I was in Florida, I sang in the church choir. And in those days, we didn't sing hymns, we sang Gregorian chant. That was pretty much all we did. We sang in Latin again, and it was beautiful. I don't know if you've ever heard Gregorian chant, but if you haven't, go on YouTube and look up Gregorian chant. It's like a meditation when you sing. It's stunningly beautiful, and it has a soothing quality, at least for me, that virtually no other music has, even the great classics. Well, at any rate, at the age of 10, my mother decided to move to Las Vegas, Nevada, which my aunt had previously moved from Florida, because she was a waitress, and that's where she could make the most money. So we picked up everything from Florida and moved from a beautiful tropical climate with palm trees and ocean and beach sand into the middle of a desert. And I mean desert. We're talking, I got there and it was 114 degrees in June 1957. And my aunt had been there a couple of years homesteading on a piece of property the government had given her. And she created a little garden with a windmill for water to bring up from a well, a propane gas tank for gas lighting, a septic tank. But in the middle of the desert, she created a little oasis with fruit trees and grass and rose bushes. But even though that was very pretty, right outside of our fence, it was desert. We're talking Gila monsters, scorpions, sidewinder rattlesnakes, you name it. Mesquite bushes and nothing but desert as far as you could see to the mountains that surrounded Las Vegas. Boy, was that a bummer. I thought I had done something seriously wrong and some karmic stuff was coming back at me like a freight train. However, as in all things, you adapt, which served me well as I went into the Marine Corps. So my freshman and sophomore and junior years, they were fairly uneventful. I was not a great student. I simply got by and unfortunately hung out with the wrong crowd of people, since I had nobody to show me how to be a guy in a male-dominated society. I hung out with, quote-unquote, the tough guys. I was sort of a mascot for the gang, since I was neither mean nor lawless, but I guess I had a pleasant personality, and I was sort of a bad guy wannabe, but I just didn't have it in me. Well, over time, throughout my junior year up to the beginning of my senior year, all of my quote-unquote friends had been sent away to reform school, which was basically jail for teenagers. I was the only one who did not, because I just couldn't do some of the things that they did. And therefore, my lawless career as a juvenile delinquent came to a crashing end very quickly. And I decided that the life of crime and injustice, or being an outlaw, was just not the kind of life for me. It was not in my DNA, so to speak. But I finished my junior year and began my senior year. And in the beginning of my senior year, I didn't want to take science and trig and trigonometry, etc., because I never had any money to go to college, since my mom was a waitress and we never had that kind of money for college. And we didn't have any college in Las Vegas at the time, since University of Nevada, Las Vegas was one little small building in the middle of the desert. No grass, no nothing, just a two-story building about a couple of 100 feet long, 2 stories, in the middle of the desert. That was University of Nevada, Las Vegas at the time. So I took what I thought would give me some practical value. So I took shop, which was industrial arts. And this is like welding and machine working and so on. So that's a whole adventure in and of itself. And I guess there's another question which will address that. I suppose that's enough on my early years in education, unless, Murali, you think there's something else I should add.
Oh, can you tell us about the engine you built?
Okay.
Which won an award at the state level?
Okay. Yes, I can. What Murali's mentioning is, when I had started my senior year, and maybe during the first 6 weeks grading period, the shop teacher, Mr. Moore, never forget him either, he said, look, there's a state contest that is going to be held near the end of the year, and every school is participating, but we've got nobody from Las Vegas High School. And I don't know why he asked me. I guess I was pretty good at what I did. I was good at welding and using machine tools and so forth. And I said, yeah, why not? What the heck? That sounds like fun. And he said, well, here's a project. I'm not sure if we can get this done because it's very complex, but we'll make a 1-cylinder gasoline engine from scratch. I mean, everything from zero. We started off with stock bars of steel, like for the cylinder, that were 3.5 inches, pure steel bars. And and smaller steel that had to be machined down for, let's say, a piston rod or something of this nature. But we're talking a full gasoline engine that had a spark plug. It was water cooled. It had a water tank, a spark plug, a coil from a car, and that was very ambitious because everything had to be done from zero. I basically created the cylinder, bored out the cylinder, bored in the cooling fins to a 10,000th of an inch. One wrong move, and if I had torn into the center of the cylinder when I was boring a cooling fin, 500 hours of work, shot. I machined the crankcase, which is where the crankshaft would go inside, and then the piston rod would go in. All of that I machined out by boring, by machining, and by, with a micrometer, using inside and outside diameters down to 10,000ths or more of an inch in accuracy. And for a piston, there was no pistons, but we had the diameter of the cylinder. So what we did is took pieces of aluminum, put it in a crucible, and melted them with torches, acetylene torches, until I had a pool of molten aluminum. I had also made the mold for the piston, which is a reverse image. Actually, if you know about how to make a mold, it's the reverse image of what you want to do. And we poured the liquid aluminum into the mold. After it hardened, I took the rough cast piston out and put it in a lathe and machined that piston down, again, to very, very fine diameter, measuring both the inside diameter of my cylinder and the outside diameter of the pistons, et cetera, et cetera. I had to bore the piston out in order to cut out the center in order for a a pin to go through that would attach to the piston rod to the crankshaft. I mean, this whole thing. And then I had to create a flywheel. This is a metal disc that had to be turned down on a machine and put on the front end of the crankshaft so it would balance it during high RPM. It acted as a balancing wheel. And so at the end of about, I don't know, 6-7 months, we finally finished it. We had everything chromed up beautifully. I mean, it was gorgeous. And you can see a picture here in the video. I was so proud of that. That was just the most amazing thing, I thought. And when we went to start it up for the first time, I was one of the few times in my life I was scared to death. Because after putting over 1,000 hours, I guess, into this thing, what if it doesn't work? I mean, there's so many things that could go wrong. You know, it had a carburetor, you know, with a needle valve. It had a little spark plug that was hooked up to a car coil and a condenser. And it had a 1-gallon water tank that used convection current to go through the cooling jacket of the engine. I mean, so many different things had to work perfectly in order for it to run. Well, the time of, the truth is here, so I wound a nylon cord around the notch in the starting piece that was on the flywheel, and I said a quick prayer to all the gods and angels and everybody else, and I gave it a good hefty pull, and he goes, nothing. Not even a poop. Not even a putt. Oh, okay. Well, we adjusted the carburetor a little bit, and I said a lot more prayers. And then I wound up the thing on the pull wheel, and I gave it another big pull. And then all of a sudden, putt, 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 and then the darn thing cranked up to 10,000 RPM in just a couple of seconds. I would say that was probably the happiest day of my young life when that thing cranked up and just ran like a banshee. You could hear it echoing all over the shop, all over the outside doors were open. You could hear it down the alleyways. And, you know, I had a grin that was from one ear to another. And my shop teacher, we high-fived, and all the kids were running around yelling and screaming. It was a big deal for us youngsters, and it was a big deal. Well, we entered my engine in the state contest, and as you can see on the video that this is attached to, the engine won second place in the state contest. Now, personally, I thought I should have won first place, because the guy who won first place, he made a pin punch. Yeah. It was really accurate, and it was very nice looking. It was a good piece of work. But I don't think it could even compare to creating a gasoline engine, internal combustion engine that actually worked. But then again, I wasn't one of the judges. I was simply happy to get it done and that it worked. And oh, by the way, I got an A in that class. So that was my gasoline engine, and at that time, when just near the end of the year at school, I was good friends with the local Marine Corps recruiter who was just down the street from the high school, and he came over to the school when I was presented the award, since I had actually joined the Marine Corps in March of 1964, 4 months before I graduated. It was a delayed entry plan, so I could get time and grade. I was actually in the Marines, time and grade, which went for promotions and money. And he came to the school, and there was a picture of me. I wish I could find it for our video, where I'm pointing at my engine, and he's standing there in his Marine uniform, looking very smart. And it says, you know, Robert Anderson joined the Marines and won second place in state and all this stuff. It was quite a thing. So that took me right up to graduation from high school, and within 2 weeks after I graduated from high school, I was on my way to San Diego for Marine Corps recruit training. And that is a whole nother story.
Tell us about how you joined Marines, Bob.
When I was a senior in high school, Unfortunately, I had picked up a very bad habit of smoking when I was young, although some years later I quit. But anyway, we'd hang out on a street corner before school, maybe a little bit at lunchtime, and we would have a cigarette and chit chat with a bunch of guys together with the crowd that I hung out with. And then sometimes at lunch, we'd go as a group, walk down the street to a little restaurant and have a sandwich and a Coke or something of that nature. Well, on the way down to the restaurant, there was a Marine Corps recruiting office. And naturally, they had all the Marine Corps, join the Marines and, Uncle Sam wants you sort of stuff. So one day I walked in and there was a staff sergeant who was in the Marines and is the recruiter. And I just kind of curious, tell me about, the Marines. And I told him a little bit about myself, and he told me about the Marines. And I told him, I said, well, I really don't want to necessarily be in the infantry, but I'd like to work, with something fairly exciting. And he says, well, I can guarantee if you sign up that you'll go to the place that we agree in your contract. So I said, oh, okay, that sounds interesting. So I thought about it, and then every other day or so, or a few days, I'd go see him again. And eventually he convinced me to sign up, or I actually convinced myself. And I talked to my mom, and I didn't have any plans for college because I couldn't afford it. At any rate, I actually went down to Los Angeles in March of 1964 and was sworn in for the Marines, and went back and finished my last few months in high school till I graduated in June, 1st of June, 1964. From there, I went to boot camp, and the whole world as I knew it altered significantly. So that's how I joined the Marines.
Bob, your platoon set drill records in recruit training and was selected as Regimental Honor Platoon. Can you please tell us about it?
Yes. I was in Platoon 361, Charlie Company, 3rd Battalion, 3rd Recruit Training Battalion. And there were like 40 platoons in total in the Recruit Training Regiment. And there were competitions. Every training cycle, called it an evolution, you had a competition with other platoons in your group, like a series or your company, and then your company to other companies, and then a battalion, and then to the regiment. Well, my drill instructor was a little Sergeant E5, and we had a corporal as well, Sergeant Sanchez. He was a Hispanic gentleman, and I think every Marine probably thinks that his drill instructor, senior drill instructor, was the meanest son of a gun that ever walked the face of the planet. Well, not only do I think he was the meanest son of a gun, I can prove it because we drilled and we had very strict discipline in those days. Corporal punishment or physical adjustment was not unheard of, though a lot of us fell into our foot lockers or off of our racks or beds. But we became very proficient at just about everything. Well, at everything, actually. Every competition, we won. And for every competition you win, you get a little streamer that you put on your guidon. A guidon is your platoon flag. Well, if you look in the other video, you'll see that there was just a whole bunch of streamers hanging off our platoon flag or guidon, which was every single one that you could have won. So that in and of itself would have won us at least, let's say battalion honor platoon. But our scores were so high in all of these areas that we went up to the regiment and our scores beat every other platoon in the regiment, recruit training regiment. In addition to which, one of these competitions was a drill evaluation, close order drill. And I wish I had a nickel for every hour on what we called the Little Grinder in San Diego. And then there's the big grinder, which is the main parade deck in San Diego Recruit Depot. And so for our drill evaluation, you'd have your platoon, which is like 60 guys, like 4 squads of 13. And your guide-on, which is the guy who has the platoon flag, and everybody follows him more or less. And your drill instructor is calling cadence and the commands. Well, we went through all kinds of intricate, close order drill movements, not just left shoulder arms, right shoulder arms to the rear march, things like this, but, left oblique, right oblique, for the whole platoon. Column of files from the left, meaning that the first squad on the left takes off, and then after the last person in that squad until your whole platoon is strung out in a long line. And then you get back together again. Very complex. But we were good. I would give anything to have a video of that. At any rate, at the end of the day, we found out that we broke the drill eval record. Not only did we take all the competition, but we broke the record for scoring that had lasted for over 2 years at the entire San Diego base. So that was, I think, a pretty good accomplishment. And that also, there was a newspaper article that was published in Las Vegas about that, which is in the other part of the video. So that's how we got Regimental Honor Platoon and the drill evaluation.
Bob, tell us how your stay in Vietnam metamorphosed you.
Okay. When I finished recruit training and infantry training, which every Marine goes through, because as everyone knows, at least every Marine knows, no matter what you do, every Marine is a rifleman first. And then whatever you do is second. We don't have all these fancy specialties and so forth. It's fairly straightforward. Well, I went into aviation and I asked for the school in weapons and explosives or ordnance because, I like things that go boom and, I don't know. It's just something that it just struck me as being quote unquote fun. So I went to 6 months of schooling in Jacksonville, Florida. And I mean, it's a lot of detail, all these different bombs and fusing. And we didn't have a lot of smart bombs like they do today, but we had guided missiles, we had rockets, we had different kinds of bombs and different racks that you hung them on, and 20-millimeter cannons that we had to know how to repair, fix, etc. This is quite a bit of knowledge you had to get. It's called AOA school, or in that case, Aviation Ordnance A school, which is your main school. Well, at any rate, when I finished that school in 6 months, by the way, I was second in the class of 46. I was highly motivated because if you fail out, you go to the infantry. And I just didn't want to go slugging around the 40 or 50 pound pack on my back, all day long. And that just, I would have done it, but I would have preferred not. So when I left the school, I went to my first duty station, which was El Toro Marine Air Base in Santa Ana, California. When I got to the base, a very unusual thing happened. And the indoctrination person who took your orders, and he asked me what outfit would I like to go in, which of course shocked me because I didn't think I had any choice. I said, well, what's the next outfit going to Vietnam? And this was in September of 1965. No, I'm sorry. This was in July of 1965 when I got to the base, June or July. And they said, well, this outfit over here, VMCJ-1, or Marine Composite Reconnaissance Squadron 1, is going to be deploying to Vietnam. It was actually the first squadron, or first or second, to be deployed to Vietnam during the war. So I actually volunteered to be the first guy over, boots on ground, or one of the first in Vietnam. And I got to Vietnam in September of 1965. This is when to Da Nang Air Base, which is where we finally landed after we spent about 3 weeks in Okinawa getting indoctrinated and shots and all kinds of other stuff. It was no man's land. I mean, we're talking, our tents weren't even put up. Forget buildings, our tents weren't even up. And we slept the first couple of nights under this big, huge tent. You know, we had, you know, they gave us sleeping bags, throwaway types. And the first night I got there, this is after flying like 14 or 16 hours on a C-130 from Okinawa to Da Nang, I drew guard duty right on the perimeter of the base. Here I was dead tired. I'm on the perimeter of the base up to my chin in elephant grass, which is a very ragged sawtooth edge type of grass that can just cut you to shreds. And I'm at those days in Da Nang, that part of the base there was a clear area of elephant grass to the tree line of about maybe 200-300 yards. And that was Indian country or enemy territory. And I was walking around at 2-3 a.m., you know, first night in Vietnam. Oh my God, you know, how did I look at this? How did I get this? It was a moonless night. And I got a message from the corporal of the guard that we were supposed to get an attack at 3 a.m., which of course was the time I was on post. Fortunately, we did not, because I could have never seen it coming. It was so dark. But at any rate, that's how I got to Vietnam. I volunteered. Silly boy.
Bob, how did you use that little spare time you had in Vietnam?
Yes, well, we had vanishing little spare time. I mean, our squadron flew photo reconnaissance and electronic countermeasures. So our birds would go in before, or, you know, the strike package or the other aircraft with a jamming to jam from the SAM surface to air missiles. And also they would do photo reconnaissance, which would be of territory or, you know, damage assessment from bombing runs or what have you. And our birds had 220-millimeter machine guns and, of course, the flares, which were explosives. And so that was my department. We were working 7 days a week, 17 to 22 hours a day. I mean, just flight after flight. And there are times when I just would lay down on the taxiway with my Mickey Mouse ears on my ears. And in the midst of all the jet engines and afterburners going off on the runway next to me, I would fall dead asleep. I was so tired. You know, because I had to arm and de-arm the jets before they'd hit the runway. I had to arm the cannons and arm the flares, which means with both jet engines running, I had to roll underneath the jet to the gun well, open the door, crawl inside, take out the arming blocks that kept the breech blocks from going home, and then, you know, roll out, show the pilot that I had them, and then off they'd go on their mission. Well, needless to say, when you finally did get off duty, usually you were just so exhausted you just flopped down on a cot, which is what we had. We didn't have beds or anything. We had just canvas cots from World War II or the Korean War. But every once in a while, there was an hour or two when we weren't so exhausted we couldn't keep our eyes open. And for some bizarre reason, I was thinking to myself, this is crazy. Is this what human beings are meant to do in this world? I mean, go out and try to destroy each other for what? I mean, I didn't hate the Viet Cong or the North Vietnamese Army. I didn't even know them. But I was a Marine and I did my duty. You know, they had weapons, I had weapons, and last man standing wins, sort of thing. But I for some reason, I had this burning curiosity to know about life, because this didn't seem like the way life should be. So I wrote a letter to my mother and my sister, and I asked them to send me books on philosophy. I didn't know one philosopher from another. You know, I wanted something that might help me understand or explain how humans thought, how we felt, why we interacted the way we do, what maybe somebody had this figured out already. So my mother and my sister went around to bookstores and they got me paperback books from Schopenhauer, who's a philosopher, Kant, Immanuel Kant, and Dialogues of Plato, which was about Socrates, and sent them to me. So, and we didn't have electricity, so I had candles, and we did eventually get electricity. But for a while there, I was reading these books on philosophy by candlelight. So that's how I spent a lot of my fair time, although I admit that there are a number of times, more than I would like to remember, where I'd go out with the guys and just get falling down stupid drunk on beer or Suntory whiskey or 33 beer or Budweiser, because they had it by the pallet over there for the Marines. But when I wasn't doing stupid stuff with my fellow Marines, I was reading books on philosophy, trying to figure out life. That's what I did in my spare time.
Bob, you were writing letters to your sister, and one of such letters started a syndicated column in all national newspapers. Please tell us about it.
Sure. This was in November or mid-November 1965. I'd been there since early September, and during that time, I was just exhausted, and I had seen guys coming off of patrol with barbed wire, twisted around their boots because the rubber would rot away from the canvas from stomping through rice paddies or streams or whatnot, and a lot of guys would come back, they'd be bandaged up or bloody, and sometimes you'd see body bags being flown in, which is they put dead Marines or soldiers in plastic bags. And but naturally, I was 18 years old. I had just turned 19 in November 1st, so I was barely 19. And all this stuff is going on, and your defenses psychologically are down because you're so exhausted, and you're always under this tension, like, is there going to be a mortar barrage, or is there going to be snipers or an attack? And one day I just sat down with a several sheets of paper, and I started writing my sister a letter about some of my experiences and how I felt, and but at the same time, near the end, I told her that I and the other Marines there, we were doing something for our country, at least we felt so, and that we were putting our life on the line to serve our country and what we felt was our duty. Now, whether that's right or wrong, it's irrelevant, okay? But we stood for something, and we put our lives on the line for what we believed in. And I told my sister, ask a lot of these people who are, protesting against the Vietnam War and raising flags and all this other stuff, what they're willing to put their life on the line for. What are you willing to die for? Okay? And anyway, my sister was very impressed with the letter, and she typed it up because I had written it by hand, and spelling was terrible because I wasn't that great of a speller at the time. Still not. But she wrote a letter to the editor of the Chicago Sun-Times, and she sent a copy of my letter to the Chicago Sun-Times with a picture of me. I was sitting on top of one of our aircraft, and somebody took a picture of me, and didn't know this, but it was published in December of 1965 under a novel heading called Letters from Vietnam. And somewhere in my letter, I talked about blood, sweat, and mud. So that was the title of the article, Blood, Sweat, and Mud, Letters from Vietnam. And apparently somebody thought that was a great idea, and word got around through the newspaper industry, and all syndicated major newspapers in the United States started publishing letters from Vietnam. But as far as I know, in December of 1965, or actually it's November when I sent it in, she sent it in late November, Mine was the very first one. And later on in the early 1980s, early to mid 80s, there was a TV show, a documentary called Letters from Vietnam, where somebody would read a letter from Vietnam and at the same time showing combat footage that would be kind of in line with what the letter said. So I found that rather interesting and rather surprising, but that's how that all started, at least to the best of my knowledge.
In the most famous battle of Vietnam at Khe Sanh, can you tell us about it?
Okay, maybe a little bit of a preamble as to how I got up there would be helpful. In my first tour in Vietnam, starting in 1965 to 1966, I didn't see a great deal of combat. There were, some mortar rounds, some sniper fire here and there, but never really got into any combat because the base was very protected by the infantry. But I would see guys from the infantry, what we call the grunts. They would come back off a patrol or from a search and destroy, we called it in those days. And, they were all torn up, bleeding, some guys in body bags, some on stretchers, and I felt guilty. I really did. I mean, here I was, an able-bodied Marine, highly trained, and yet I'm kind of back in the rear with the gear while my brothers were out there, humping, in the jungle and getting torn up by the Viet Cong or the NVA. And it really bothered me a great deal, to be honest with you. And so what I did was, nearing the end of my first tour, a friend of mine and I, we said, okay, I'm going to see if I can get into a combat outfit, because I wanted to make sure that if I'm a Marine and I'm going to do my bit in combat like other Marines did. So what happened is he and I went over to a place called Marble Mountain, which was right on the South China Sea, where a different Marine air group was stationed. There were helicopters. And I went into the squadron that had just gunships. I didn't want transport aircraft. I didn't want, specifically medevac. I wanted gunships for combat. So I went in and I said, look, I'm a Corporal E4. I've already got a year in country. I know the drill. I'm competent and proficient in my MOS, which was explosives and ordnance. And they said, okay, we'll have an opening in a couple of months when some of our people rotate back. I said, sign me up. So I did. And after I got in and I passed my door gunner qualifications, I started flying. And I certainly began to get my taste of combat from there, because most every mission, you're in some type of a combat situation, since we were gunships and rockets. So just as an example, we were flying a combat mission one day, and one of the outside gun jammed, which is what the pilot would fire. There were 4 external M60 machine guns and 2 internal, one for the crew chief, one for the door gunner. But one of the external guns for the pilot was jammed, and it was on my side. So the pilot said, look, Bob, we can't go, we're not fully capable going back in the zone and doing our job. Is there any way you can try to clear that jam? I said, let me try. I said, fly straight and level. And we were about 2,000 feet, flying about 90 knots, 90 miles an hour, give or take. And nothing but jungle below, enemy territory. And I crawl out of the helicopter, literally. And I wrapped my left leg around the skid that the aircraft sits on. And I put my right hand on the external gun's barrel, and my left hand was on my gun mount. And with my right leg, I tried to kick the operating handle. That's the handle that pushes the bolt back, because I could see a casing that was not ejected. And I figured if I could get the bolt back, that the casing would fly off and so on. So here I am, I'm kicking the operating handle, and finally, the jam cleared. And I'm just about ready to get back into the aircraft, literally hanging out underneath it. And all of a sudden I hear bang, 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 bang. I said, oh my God in heaven, we're taking fire. The bird's getting hit, and I'm hanging out here, hanging out in the breeze, outside the helicopter. So I'm looking around to see where we're taking the fire from or where it's hitting. And lo and behold, my gunner's belt, which is a 4-inch wide leather belt that has a lock on the front, was flapping on the side of the helicopter. And so here I was, with 1 foot wrapped around a skid and 1 foot on an external barrel, not connected to the helicopter at all. And I just kind of went stone freaked out. Not craziness, but I was scared. And I toggled the intercom. I said, sir, it's okay. We're not taking any hits. It's just my gunner's belt. It detached, which is a small way of saying that I screwed up. The gunner's belt has a latch, and then there's a locking pin that goes through the latch. So I forgot to push the locking pin down. When I crawled out of the helicopter, the latch tripped on the lip of the helicopter floor and disconnected. The pilot was pissed. He says, Anderson, get your butt back in here. Do you realize how much paperwork I have to fill out if you fall? And I said, aye, sir. And I very slowly got back in the bird. So that's just kind of one of many, many those types of experiences, flying at night in enemy territory, getting shot at with big tracers and all kinds of stuff. But the caisson bit was, we used to fly in and out of caisson doing what's known as recon inserts and extractions. We were a gunship, a Huey, UH-1E, small. And so we could get into fairly tight places. And every once in a while, we would fly up to Quai Son, which was right on the right on the border of North Vietnam. It's a little plateau surrounded by, several large hills. And we would take just 2 recon guys, because that's all we could fit in, because all we had was a bench seat. I was on one part of it, crew chief on the other, and we put the 2 recon guys in the middle. Well, anyway, we would do that back and forth, and I got to know some of the people at the base, because in between flights, we would, just kind of hang out with people while we're getting refueled or rearmed. And one day my pilot comes up to me and says, Corporal Anderson. I said, yes, sir. He says, I was talking to the commanding officer, happened to be a major. He was an infantry major. He says, they lost their ordnance guy. He had rotated back, and there was some mess up, and they don't have anybody to take care of all the small arms and grenades and mortars and whatnot on the base. But they said they can get somebody in about a month. So would you volunteer to, go temporary duty over to Quai Son and handle these things until the new guy comes in? And of course, me, absolutely, sir, aye. I smartly saluted, and they brought all my gear up to Quai Son, and I slept in a tent. It was right next to the fuel farm, where there's big rubber bladders of jet fuel and diesel fuel and gasoline. And that was really interesting, because we were surrounded by that time. There was patrols that were sent out. It was just before the Tet Offensive, which is when the base really got hammered. This was in May of '67. And there were only 2,000 or 3,000 estimated NVA, North Vietnamese Army, around the base that our intelligence people were able to identify, whereas during the offensive, there were like 20, 30,000. But at the time, there were only 500 of us Marines on that base. So even then, we were hopelessly outgunned. And when C-125s, which is a small piston-driven cargo plane, or a C-130, which is a 4-engine turboprop, would land quickly on the short runway, and dump pallets of ammunition out. I'm the guy with a couple of other Marines who had to organize that ammunition, get it off the runway and into the explosives ammo dump before the mortar rounds started coming in, and which they would invariably do, not every day, but certainly, a couple of times a week. We would start taking incoming rounds because you could tell what we were unloading. It's fairly straightforward because they had binoculars. They knew what was going on just as well as we did. So that was kind of my caisson experience, where at night, because we were concerned about sappers, which are guys who would carry explosive charges and toss them into tents in the middle of the night, they would crawl through the barbed wire. We slept in our cots with our rifles locked and loaded, my M14, and just a safety on, and I slept with a bayonet underneath my pillow with my hand around my bayonet, because you never know when there's always some explosions going off from artillery or whatever. And, it did happen where a couple of times, sappers got in and they threw explosive charges into a tent and wiped out all the guys in the tent. It wasn't meant for like an attack to overrun the base, but just to unnerve everybody, to put them on edge so they couldn't sleep, and therefore you're not as combat effective. So when I left caisson, I was sort of a nervous wreck because I had very little sleep, or I would wake up at if a gnat landed on my mosquito netting or something. And so the day I went back to Dong Ha, which is not quite as forward as caisson was, I caught a ride in a convoy that was going from caisson to Dong Ha. And, I loaded being in charge of all the ordnance, I loaded myself up with grenades and bandoliers of ammo, white phosphorus grenades, smoke grenades, fragmentation, like 6 magazines of ammo. I was a walking ammo shop. And I happened to get a ride in a fuel truck, gasoline of all things. And about halfway there, we got attacked. Halfway between caisson and Dong Ha, we got attacked. And so the convoys stopped. I'm sitting in a gasoline truck, so I jump out and I try to kind of get away from the truck and go into a ditch while they sent a patrol into the tree line, which was about 200 yards from the road, to try to, get rid of the snipers or whoever was there shooting at the convoy. So about an hour and a half later, we all remounted and went and finished our journey. But it was kind of dicey there for a while. So that was my caisson experience, and just a very small piece of my combat experience, because every time you flew, you were flying into something, and you're always flying low and slow. So you're just sitting there as one big target. But that's what I signed up for, and I don't regret it. But I felt when I left finally Vietnam in 1967, and I was there in country 22 and a half months, I felt like I had done my part. I didn't shirk any duty. I didn't just stay in the rear with the gear. I played Marine, and I did combat stuff, real combat stuff. So that was my combat, just a few short combat stories that I hope will give just a flavor of that kind of experience.
Bob, after return from Vietnam, how did you go about building your life again?
Returned from Vietnam, I was posted to my last duty station, was Marine Corps Air Station, Yuma, Arizona. They tried to put you in your last duty station close to your home, so if you chose not to re-enlist, they wouldn't have a lot of travel cost. And at one point, I was thinking seriously about making the Marines a career, but there were a few things happened that I decided that I could probably better spend my life doing something a little bit more productive than, shooting a M60 machine gun, which is what I did in my second tour, because I spent 2 tours of duty. My second tour, I was a door gunner on a helicopter, and I knew that there wasn't a big uh, rush for hiring door gunners out in civilian life, or somebody who knew how to field strip and clean a 20 millimeter cannon or work with high explosives, unless I went in law enforcement, which I considered. But I just happened to walk into this one school, Southern Nevada Technical School, because there was no UNLV at the time. I wanted to get a degree in electrical engineering, but there was no universities close by, and I couldn't afford to go elsewhere. So I went to this building and walked inside, and just as I walked in to the right, there was a lot of noise and clatter coming from a room. My goodness, what is that? And I walked into this room, and there was all kinds of machinery and 80 column cards, for goodness sake. And I talked to the instructor, who was a little gnomish looking fellow, about 5'5", with a little goatee. Name was Donald Sipin, became one of my best friends. And he talked to me about this thing called data processing. I didn't even know how to spell it. I mean, I didn't even know what a data was, much less a processing. So that's how I got into school, because I knew I had to further my education. I was just a high school student, an average one at that. So the fear of God was in me. I didn't want to, depend on my poor waitress mother and, and just do odd jobs or wash dishes. So I was highly motivated, and certainly being a Marine, I was highly motivated to succeed and accomplish my mission, which is find a career and get really good at it. So that's how I transitioned from my Marine Corps career into civilian life and starting school. It was like a junior college or community college 2-year course of study. So that's how I started.
Bob, you were campus recruited by a startup software company. Tell us.
Yes, that was another interesting story. As I said, I was very highly motivated when I started my schooling in data processing, and I had to work a full-time job. I worked a graveyard shift from 11 till 6 a.m. At McCarran Field, refueling airplanes, and as a janitor, cleaning bathrooms and swabbing the deck, which of course I was pretty good at. And at 6 a.m., I would get out of my dirty work clothes or coveralls, and I would shower in the employees area, and I would dress up in a suit and a tie and glasses and a briefcase. That's how I left McCarran Field or the airport to go to my first class, which was data processing, which was a 3-hour class starting at 7:30 in the morning. And as well as that class, I had to take the other required subjects, things like accounting and English writing, writing, not literature, but writing, which held me in good stead later in my life. Business machines, second-year typing, electronics drafting, a number of subjects. There were others, but I can't remember them right offhand. At any rate, I was driven. If I wasn't working, I was studying. I'd get maybe 2-3 hours sleep, 4 at the most at night when I was in school, because I was studying. I would literally fall asleep on the computer console at the school when everybody else had gone home, and I was debugging a program in machine language by looking at the lights on the console. In those days, it was done in base 16, which is called hexadecimal, and binary, which was one level down. But I learned the guts of computers from the little ferrite discs that we called core back in those days. This is before transistors or anything. And I would be debugging programs that, long past when I should have gone home and gotten sleep. However, I I aced all of my tests. I had like almost a straight A average in every subject except my second year typing class. I was sort of an average second year typist. Um, but in the first semester, I was taking tests like everyone else. But my nickname in school was Computer Bob. That was my nickname. And they also thought I was a narcotics agent in the 60s because I always came in a suit and tie and glasses and a briefcase. So you dress the part, you get your whole head and your mindset into what you want to become. And gradually over time, you mold yourself into your vision of yourself, which is what I did. And I remember when I was pumping gas at a gas station, because I even worked part-time pumping gas at a gas station, whether I was pumping gas at a gas station or whether I was cleaning toilets and urinals in the airport, this one phrase kept going through my head. You have to do things today that others will not do, so that tomorrow you'll have things that others will not have. And so I worked my butt off. I worked harder than just about anybody really, because I didn't have this innate natural brilliance. I was smart, but I had to work very hard. And what happened was I became number 2 in our class of 46. I was second in the class, which kind of annoyed me, but I was second in my other class as well, and I just couldn't make it over that last little hurdle. At any rate, in our third semester, these 2 bankers wanted to start a software company called Systems Research International, and they wanted the 2 top students from the school in data processing and programming, etc., to start the company. So there was my friend, his name was Bobby Kane. He was just brilliant. I mean, he was innately brilliant. I don't think he had to work quite as hard as I did, because I think he was just smarter than me. Who knows? But at any rate, our instructor, Don Sipin, who by that time was a good friend, he had put Bobby Kane and I up to these 2 gentlemen. And I said, Don, I still have another semester. He says, you've completed all your requirements, for the degree and your other courses. And my gosh, you're creating the tests for the students. We'll graduate you, a semester early. So that's what they did. I graduated with a certification rating of outstanding and a 3.7 GPA, which would have been 3.9 if it wasn't for me getting a C on my second year typing test. That was annoying. But that's how I got picked to begin my career in computers right out of, before I even finished school.
Bob, you had a great career in Revlon. Can you please tell us about it?
Wow. Well, I spent a couple of years working at SRI. Then I took a little bit of a hiatus of about a year, at which time I had become a teacher of transcendental meditation and got married. Then I went to work for the Las Vegas Valley Water District as a programmer analyst and did a spectacular job there. I had letters of commendation from the general manager. I programmed entire systems by myself, payroll systems, billing systems, cost reporting systems. I was the only programmer that was there. And it must have been 60 or 70, 80 different, production programs in about 5 different systems that my boss and I designed them, although I did a lot of the grunt work of the design overall. And then I did, of course, all the programming, and they had somebody key punch the instructions. It was RPG2, I remember. I didn't even know what that was. I mean, I took COBOL, I took Fortran in school, as well as assembler and machine language. But the water district knew I had a good programming background, so they sent me to a week school in Los Angeles to learn RPG, Report Program Generator 2. Very strange language. You didn't have read and write commands. It was done in what they call cycles. which you had to kind of bend your head around. But eventually I became incredibly good at it. So good, as a matter of fact, that the IBM systems engineers used to call me in to fix systems and programs in their customers that hire me as an outside consultant, and I'd do this after work at night to fix things that they just either couldn't do or didn't have the time to do, which gave me a few extra bucks in my pocket. So after 4 years there, I moved to Illinois with my wife and children. That's a whole different other story that we don't have the time to go into, but I was the manager of management information services for Armor Pharmaceutical Company, which was at that time owned by Greyhound Corporation. So we had IBM equipment. It was no, we didn't. They were just converting over to Burroughs equipment, which I had never heard of before, but I learned it. And it was a very nice environment, pharmaceutical manufacturing. Everybody's in white coats and laboratories and stuff, which I really enjoyed. And, I learned the ropes. Being a technician is very different from being a manager. Those of us who have gone through that transition know that becoming a manager of people and budgets and so on is very different than being a great technician. And I made a lot of mistakes. I surely did. But I tried to learn from them. And eventually we were purchased by Revlon Corporation away from Greyhound. They were expanding their healthcare group. Over a 10-year period of time, from the time I started under Greyhound until Revlon was broken up in the mid-'80s, I worked my way up to Division Director of Management Information Services for the Pharmaceutical Products Division, called Ethical Pharmaceuticals at that time, of the Revlon Healthcare Group. We had 5 companies. And I used to travel all around the United States and Puerto Rico, which is where one of our companies was. And I would, oversee the departments and budgets and hiring and all that other kind of stuff. At that point, we were bought off by, actually we were sold off. It was the first corporate takeover, hostile takeover in the mid-'80s done with junk bonds with Michael Milken and his corporate raiders. Well, I went into Roar Pharmaceutical, bought Armor, because I decided to stay, and they put me up at corporate headquarters in Pennsylvania. So I moved my family from where I was to Pennsylvania. Well, I did not work out real well in that particular corporate environment. It was mostly politics and merging of 2 different organizations who had very different cultures. And at the end of the day, quite honestly, I was fired. I just didn't fit in. I wanted to get things done, and I could see what needed to be done. But most of the people in that time were so interested in looking good and playing the political power games, which I am not good at, and I never was good at. So eventually I left and wound up at Computer Aid Incorporated, which was a consulting company. The president at that time, Tony Salvaggio, hired me, and he's just a smart entrepreneur guy. He was a salesman at IBM and decided to start his own company. And I was one of the first people to come with the company. So the first real big contract that I was on was an outsourcing of application support, where they put me up as the team leader. Since I had been an executive, I'd managed teams, many different environments, and I built an application support team. Then we took over, this was at DuPont in Wilmington, Delaware. We took over from their IT organization, where the users were just up in arms because they were treated like problems, not customers. Well, I came in there and smooth things over, within a year, I cut the cost of operating their mainframe systems. I cut the cost of running them by half by looking at the job streams, customizing them, fixing the areas that nobody else thought of fixing that keep the systems from breaking, where we went from like 40 to 50 system bombs per month, which means the batch jobs in particular would blow up and $9-10 million worth of billing wouldn't go out. Well, within, I would say, 6 months, I took that down to zero with my team. And we all worked very hard, but it was a team effort. From that point, I knew how to run support organizations. I knew what customer service was. I knew what applications were. I knew how to get knowledge from some people into other people's heads. So I began developing processes for application support. And little by little over time, I developed an entire product line around process-driven application support that was based on managing by metrics, or capture data at its source only once, categorize it, produce metrics graphs that match with your service level agreements with your customers, and prove that you're saving them money. Don't just talk about it. We were the only company that could actually prove through multiple different metrics that we were saving the company's money, improving customer service and customer satisfaction. So that business over a 24-year period that I built almost from nothing wound up making about $40 to $60 million a year. So in 23 years, that was almost $750 million. And at that same time, I invented something called Tracer, which was a automated tool for specifically designed in the application support space for process management of events or things that happened, where your support staff would just create an event. It would walk them through the process. They would put in data in different process steps, just like you would in manufacturing process control. And that's how we got our metrics. And lo and behold, we got that system patented because nobody else had ever done that before. And that Tracer system was patented, and it was that plus all of the processes. And I created a training department, to train people in process, driven management of application support. Then another set of training for how to use the process management software. Then I had to create a print shop, because at those days we didn't have a lot of electronic media. And so we had, certain manuals, training manuals and process guides that eventually got turned into electronics. So it was a whole line of business. And I was also, because I was made product manager, I had to do marketing studies. And I did marketing. I put together all the sales collateral, whether it be presentations, designing brochures. Eventually, Computer Aid wanted to start a European operation. So they sent me over to start up European operations. And I spent, a couple of weeks a month in London, just west of London. And I was the chief technology officer for our European operations. And I flew all over Europe, trying to get new business. And I even went into Eastern Europe, into Romania and Sweden and Netherlands and, Ireland, certainly the UK. And so that was very interesting. Also the Far East. I also went to Japan several times, because the Japanese were very interested in process controlled IT and managing by metrics rather than hyperbole, or management by discussion rather than solid numbers. So I was even in the Far East, and then Australia. I spent a fair amount of time in Australia as well, because we started up an operation in Australia that I was responsible for. So that's what I did for the remainder of my career, until the age of 70, when my body finally gave out and I retired. So that's my career in a nutshell.
Bob, You had a spiritual inclination from the beginning. How did you develop it further?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and over the years, I've come to realize that there's no separation in life between what we call spiritual and what we call material. Ultimately, everything is spiritual, or everything has a purpose. Everything has specific rules and laws that they function on, as well as how they operate in our lives. So I try not to get them separated, but for the purpose of discussion, when I was in Vietnam, and probably this is something that it's hard to explain. I don't know why I thought this way, but I felt that there was something wrong with human beings for no real reason, killing each other, causing chaos, and not just Vietnam, but this was all over the world in one form or another. It made no sense to me. I couldn't see any purpose in human existence other than for chaos and to consume resources and to die. I mean, that was about it. And I had a very close hand at understanding what dying was about. So I wanted to find out, is there anything more? I mean, it's a primordial question. What's this all about? Is there more? Is this all there is? So I started reading books on philosophy that I asked my mother and sister to send to me. They didn't answer any questions. They just talked in circles and made more confusion than clarity. Although Immanuel Kant, I thought, was very good, but it didn't give you anything to grip onto that you could say, okay, I can use this in my life. They just didn't do that. When I got out of the Marines, I went to school and I was working full time, and I was basically just a wreck from just exhaustion and working and so on. One of my friend's mothers, who I grew up with, happened to be a teacher of transcendental meditation with the Maharishi. And one day I was just visiting her because my friend was out and about somewhere. She looked at me, and I always thought she was a little on the flaky side doing all this spiritual stuff, quote unquote. But she played mom then. She said, look, I want you to come in here, sit down, do what I tell you, shut up. When we're done, you can ask questions. And that's how I learned to meditate. I was told to sit down, shut up, do what I say, and then ask questions. Well, something happened. There was a phase shift internally. And I realized that something was different. I couldn't put my finger on it, intellectually, but internally I could feel something had shifted. And I couldn't even describe it as more peaceful, more energetic, more anything, but something shifted. Over the next year, I got into it more and decided to become a teacher of TM. This is when I quit my job and went to Mallorca, Spain for 5 months and met my future wife there. And I taught TM for 9 years. And just on unusual, from a friend who we taught TM, learned these practices of this guy called Guru Rajananda, who was from South Africa. And he was just raving about it. He says, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. I mean, realizations and openness that I had never experienced before, he said. So my wife and I said, look, let's stop teaching TM for just now and give this thing a try. And if it doesn't work out fine, we'll do TM again and go on teaching, etc. But we wanted to give it a fair shot. So we started doing Guru Raj's practices, and it indeed was, again, a quantum difference, quantum shift, a very fundamental shift, I felt, and my wife as well. So we decided to keep on with his practices, and within, I'd say, 6 months, he was on his first tour of the United States, and he just happened to stop in Chicago because some of his traveling companions told him there were a couple of his meditators there, my wife and I had already signed up for the course in California, which was Guru Raj's first course. And he actually came to our house. He drove all the way from Chicago O'Hare Field, about 60 miles south, to a town called Kankakee, Illinois, where we lived. And, you know, somebody knocked on the door. I opened it up, and here's this little brown guy in a suit and tie. And we went, holy crap, it's Guru Raj. And, you know, I'm flabbergasted. And, well, a number of things happened, which we don't have the time for here, but we went to California on the same airplane. And he actually held my hand for about an hour, interestingly enough, eyes closed. And that, I can't tell you what kind of an experience it was, but again, something again shifted internally. So all of these things are happening, and they're not intellectual, they're not quote unquote emotional, they're far more subtle, far more subtle. And when I was at the course with him, I happened to be sitting on the registrar's desk. The school was empty, it was a summer vacation. And he comes out of this room and he says, Bob. I said, yes, Guru Raj, what is it? He says, come in here. I said, oh, okay. So I go into this room with him, and he told me to sit down, and there was flowers and incense and stuff. And he did a puja, or a prayer, and he actually put his hands on my head. He said, I confer upon you the name Sujay. So, and he also asked me to tell him what my mantra was, which you never do. But since he's the one that gave it to me, I did. And he said it several times. So that was a very special time. I mean, there's probably some people who really understand all of this stuff, but I didn't. I just, sure, whatever you say, you know, you're the master, you know what you're doing, and if it works for me, and that's good enough. I didn't care about anything else. And that evening's lecture, he, you know, said, I'd like to introduce you to Sujay, which means victor or herald of goodness, which is fascinating, to say the least. But again, it's not something that you necessarily are in full bloom, but something you have the potential to be. And that your life should be dedicated or focused on living up to that kind of an ideal, which I thought was very laudable. So I've done everything in my power in my life to try and live up to that injunction, which happened to also be my spiritual name, quote unquote. And for the next 12 years, I traveled with him around the United States with my wife for courses. We corresponded back and forth between South Africa and my home, you know, writing and, you know, philosophy, poems, etc., which are in my book, by the way, at the end of the book. And so the only thing I can say is that since learning how to, even meditation with TM or whatever your technique happens, my technique happened to be, I recognized that there was a broadening of perspective, an opening of the heart or the emotional self. I found myself being less critical, less anxious, more forgiving, more intuitive, both in my work and in my understanding of life. I started reading, you know, various scriptural texts from India, like the Upanishads and certain parts of the Vedas, and other lives of saints and masters from across the world in different religions. I studied the Bible more. I read the Quran. I read, you know, a lot of other spiritual texts. And the funny thing is that when you scrape away the culture and the doctrine and the dogma and the thou shalt not do this and thou shalt do that kind of stuff, they all were ultimately saying the same thing, is that humanity and the universe is one, appearing as many, that there is a universal awareness or universal consciousness that permeates as the foundation of everything. And even physicists are finding this out today through experimentation. When the great sages from 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years ago were writing about it from their own personal experiences in words of their time, But I also studied quantum physics and, cosmology and so forth, because I just have a thirst to learn. And I found complete compatibility when you take away the external indicators per se, and you get down to the roots. They're even saying the same thing. So that you can't even call it a goal anymore. It's simply that I wanted to know myself, my real self, not what I've accumulated in this lifetime, which is a personality and ideas and thoughts, etc. But um, I basically decided that it was time for me to not so much identify with things that I was doing, things that people told me I was, and start turning inward and finding out what's the foundation, where's the ground state from where I really live, I really exist. And that has been my Murali, could you pause this a minute? Hello? Okay, great. Was that what you needed? Okay, buddy, thanks a lot. You should get that information in the next day or two in the mail. I hope I got it right, the address in Port St. Lucie. All right, man. Thanks a million for the call back. All right, buddy. Take care. Thank you. Okay, sorry, I had to take that call. That was a congressman. But anyway, so my whole journey, call it spiritual journey if you like, which is no more than a life journey. I looked at my entire life as just a journey. Nothing special, nothing really unusual, just going from one day to the next, doing what seemed to crop up in my life. And on the internal side, that also was nothing special. It didn't matter how many books I read or philosophies I believed in, totally irrelevant. It's what you are that makes the difference at your core. And then how do you act from that core? How does your life, is it that is outward facing? All the words in the world don't do a darn bit of good if in your heart you're still constrained and you're still muddled in confusion and false identity. It's when we let go of everything. When I let go of everything, I found that I had true freedom, because then I could do anything. I could become anything. Thoughts and things that I would never think of simply appeared. And I revel in the beauty of the creative process that exists pretty much on its own, but only if we are open to it. All of us have that potential. We just have to stop believing in this false identity that has just been an accumulation of events and memories over a lifetime or possibly more. But realize that true self, that inner awareness, that observer, that is the perceiver of all these activities, that's the real us. That's infinite, that's eternal, that doesn't change, that simply is. And the more that we realize, that we recognize our own essential nature and divest ourselves of all these false identities, the happier we become, because we don't try to be anything or do anything special. We do what is our duty in life. We work hard. We treat others with equality as we want to be treated, but we allow things to flow in and out of our life smoothly, without attachment, without obsession. There is freedom. It's right in front of us. It's within us. If we only just turn our attention inward, a little bit, then all this outward stuff seems to make more sense, at least it does to me. So that's kind of my journey and my message to anyone who happens to listen to this.
Okay, Bob. Fascinating. Now, one last question. There are many other disadvantaged children like you were in your childhood. They look up to people like you for guidance. What would you like to tell them?
I guess my message would be, you can be anything that you want to be if you want it bad enough and are willing to work for it, no matter the stumbling blocks, no matter the obstacles. Have the attitude, I first have to have a goal. I want to do something, be something. I don't care what it is, doctor, lawyer, the best garbage collector in the town. I really don't care. It's irrelevant. But have a goal. Then understand what you need to get to that goal. And then work toward that goal as if your life depends on it, because it does. And either achieve your goal or die in the attempt. Never be disheartened or discouraged by failure. Failure is simply an opportunity to learn what didn't work properly. That gives you another direction. Never beat yourself up over failures. If you're not failing, you're not doing anything. Always remember that. And just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Keep your goal in mind. Keep your next step in mind. And just keep at it until the goal is achieved or you die trying. That's the best advice I can give. That nobody is helpless, no matter what your circumstances. As a matter of fact, those who are born with little have the most to gain. Those who feel they have a lot already are self-satisfied and don't really try to change their condition or alter it, because they're sucked into this whole worldview of things and material and whatnot. Those of us who came up sort of the hard way realize that it's not things that make a happy life. It's not money. It's not really position. These are all temporary. It's something that's inside of us, indwelling. That when we pay attention to that, the whole outer life is enhanced, expanded, and becomes joyous, regardless of the external circumstances, conditions, possessions, or lack of them. Because true happiness comes from within, not from things. That's about all I have to say. My whole journey, call it spiritual journey if you like, which is no more than a life journey. I looked at my entire life as just a journey. Nothing special, nothing really unusual, just going from one day to the next, doing what seemed to crop up in my life. And on the internal side, that also was nothing special. You know, it didn't matter how many books I read or philosophies I believed in, totally irrelevant. It's what you are that makes the difference at your core. And then how do you act from that core? How does your life, is it that is outward facing? All the words in the world don't do a darn bit of good if in your heart you're still constrained and you're still muddled in confusion and false identity. It's when we let go of everything. When I let go of everything, I found that I had true freedom, because then I could do anything. I could become anything. Thoughts and things that I would never think of simply appeared. And I revel in the beauty of the creative process that exists pretty much on its own, but only if we are open to it. All of us have that potential. We just have to stop believing in this false identity that has just been an accumulation of events and memories over a lifetime or possibly more. But realize that true self, that inner awareness, that observer, that is the perceiver of all these activities, that's the real us. That's infinite. That's eternal. That doesn't change. That simply is. And the more that we realize, that we recognize our own essential nature and divest ourselves of all these false identities, the happier we become, because we don't try to be anything or do anything special. We do what is our duty in life. We work hard. We treat others with equality as we want to be treated, but we allow things to flow in and out of our life smoothly, without attachment, without obsession. There is freedom. It's right in front of us. It's within us. If we only just turn our attention inward a little bit, then all this outward stuff seems to make more sense, at least it does to me. So that's kind of my journey and my message to anyone who happens to listen to this.
Okay, Bob. Fascinating. Now, one last question. There are many other disadvantaged children like you were in your childhood. They look up to people like you for guidance. What would you like to tell them?
I guess my message would be, you can be anything that you want to be if you want it bad enough and are willing to work for it, no matter the stumbling blocks, no matter the obstacles. Have the attitude, I first have to have a goal. I want to do something, be something. I don't care what it is, doctor, lawyer, the best garbage collector in the town. I really don't care. That's irrelevant. But have a goal. Then understand what you need to get to that goal. And then work toward that goal as if your life depends on it, because it does. And either achieve your goal or die in the attempt. Never be disheartened or discouraged by failure. Failure is simply an opportunity to learn what didn't work properly. That gives you another direction. Never beat yourself up over failures. If you're not failing, you're not doing anything. Always remember that. And just keep putting one foot in front of the other. Keep your goal in mind. Keep your next step in mind. And just keep at it until the goal is achieved or you die trying. That's the best advice I can give. That nobody is helpless, no matter what your circumstances. As a matter of fact, those who are born with little have the most to gain. Those who feel they have a lot already are self-satisfied and don't really try to change their condition or alter it, because they're sucked into this whole worldview of things and material and whatnot. Those of us who came up sort of the hard way realize that it's not things that make a happy life. It's not money. It's not really position. These are all temporary. It's something that's inside of us, indwelling. That when we pay attention to that, the whole outer life is enhanced, expanded, and becomes joyous, regardless of the external circumstances, conditions, possessions, or lack of them. Because true happiness comes from within, not from things. That's about all I have to say.